立法會主席。
The President.
請各位繼
Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber.
請各位議員保持肅靜。如果你
Members, please remain quiet. If you do not remain quiet, I would take it as misbehavior. Mr. Lam Chuk Ting, please remain quiet. Mr. Lam Chuk Ting, please remain quiet. All members, please remain quiet. If you continue to shout, I will regard that as misbehavior. Mr. Ted Hui, this is my last warning for you.
行政
The Chief Executive's question time. Members who wish to ask questions, please press the Request to Speak button. Each member will be given 3 minutes to put questions to and receive replies from the Chief Executive. And the question time of each member should not exceed 1.5 minutes. When 3 minutes are up, the bell will sound as a reminder. In order to allow more members to put questions, the question time should be conducted in a short question, short answer format. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, first of all, thank you for coming to the spring reception of the labour sector and also to give an address. Now, we are very much concerned about importation of labour as well as the workers' safety and health. Now, in the past year, there's been an increase in the number of theft cases at work, and it is worrying. So I hope you will put forward measures to reduce industrial accidents. Now, I'd like to ask about workers dying suddenly at work, especially for commercial drivers. This is a serious problem of people dying out of exhaustion. There were 2 such cases reported already last month. And taxi drivers work long hours. And because they become tired from long hours, there have been many accidents. Now, for commercial drivers, they work long hours and their population is also aging. This is a latent risk in the community. The labour sector has always asked for legislation for work hours to protect workers, but the government is reluctant to do so. Now, for long working hours, low pay, and aging drivers' population, this causing an immense risk to the community. What is the government going to do about that? Chief Executive. Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Poon, for the question. Same as members, we care much about the safety of workers in the construction sector and in the transportation sector. Last term of the government spent a lot of time studying legislation for standard working hours. This is a complex issue. It is also much controversial. And before we have any conclusion on the matter, the government will try its best to improve occupational safety and health of workers. So the Development Bureau and the relevant organizations will do a lot in that respect. Now, especially for commercial drivers of public vehicles, recently there was an accident causing public concerns. The Secretary for Transport and Housing is in active discussion with the bus operators. Hopefully there will be a positive response in the near term. Well, it's not yet 3 minutes. Can I ask further? Would you consider following the practice of Japan? That is, they have a piece of legislation to guard against sudden death arising from exhaustion from work. Now, for all proposals that have to do with workers' occupational safety and health, the SL government will always consider them because we put people first. Oh, that's, time's up, so I won't say more. Mr. Ted Hui, Mr. Slam, about the students going into the civic square. Yesterday, the Court of Final Appeal granted the appeal of the trio and that they shouldn't have been imprisoned. So that ruling shows that the government was totally wrong to seek appeal of their sentence. So there were 3 young people with ideals who were put into jail for no reason. Do you admit that you have made a mistake? Why are you taking young people to task, especially those who are fighting for democracy? Do you think your job is only done when you manage to send them to prison? Chief Executive. Well, I've expected that for the non-establishment camp, some members will make remarks or draw conclusions as a result of the Court of Final Appeal ruling yesterday. But that's much removed from the fact. Now, yesterday, the so-called the trio's appeal being granted by the Court of Final Appeal, don't take a simplistic view on it. Please study the ruling. Now, for the ruling yesterday, it's in English and Chinese, so you could read the Chinese version. In fact, from the Court of Final Appeal ruling, it's not as Mr. Ted Hui put it. That is, it was a mistake for the Secretary for Justice to seek an appeal on the sentencing terms. The ruling actually has laid down criteria for sentencing. The Court of Appeal has also endorsed some of the work done by the the Department of Justice. Perhaps I could share some of the main points of the ruling with you. In the ruling, it stated that for the civic concept, it can be accepted in Hong Kong. That is, the concept of civil disobedience is recognizable in Hong Kong. But if it breaches a certain law, then that means the offender has already breached the law and that they have crossed the line of breaching law while exercising their rights and freedoms. Now, Mr. Ted Hui mentioned freedom, and so if this is a reason for their action, it is not acceptable. And then the Court of Final Appeal also accepts that at the Court of Appeals, in the Court of Appeals ruling, there has to be deterrent sentence where violence is involved, especially also when there's a large-scale assembly. So it is necessary for imprisonment term. So the Court of Appeals ruling in that sense is appropriate, and it should serve as the standards in future for considering such cases. So I only have 3 minutes, so I'm not going to read the whole ruling, but I would suggest members to study the rulings in detail. Please sit down. Your time is up. Ms. Alice Mack. You should thank Mr. Ted Hui for helping you. Now, in the policy address, you said you will review the maternity leave arrangement. In fact, in 2000, the International Labour Organization has a covenant to say that maternity leave should be at least 14 weeks. Now, of course, I probably won't benefit from the maternity leave myself, but can I ask when you're going to start the review on maternity leave? When women have children, how is it possible that their wages won't be reduced? Because, as you know, they only enjoy 2/3 of wages during maternity leave. So can you make sure that women will enjoy full pay? Do you have a timetable for the review? Chief Executive. Thank you, Ms. Alice Mack, for your question. No, I'm the first female chief executive. Of course, women have high expectation of me. And I would very much like to study actively issues of interest to women. Now, the Secretary for Labour and Health Welfare is a man, but like me, he is very much concerned about women's interests and rights. And then a former member of in this council of the FTU, Ms. Chen Yunhan, she's now become the chairperson of the Women's Commission. And that I think that should show the determination of this term of the government in promoting women's rights and interests. About extending maternity leave, we are now studying the relevant issue. The scope of the study would cover what Ms. Alice Mack just mentioned about wages, the number of days or weeks, and so on. Now, after the study is completed, we would like to report to this council as soon as possible. But of course, as with any labor issues, I very much hope that the employers and the employees could reach consensus. So when we come to this council, the issue would be less controversial, and then the relevant government proposals could then be endorsed quickly. Ms. Alice Mack, you say you're going to do the review study. Apart from the number of weeks or the wage level, now there are some employees and not under the protection of the 418 contract arrangement. So will these employees also enjoy protection? Now you said there is need for the two sides to have consensus. I'm sure even members like Mr. Tommy Chang from the employer sector, they would like to have grandchildren. So I'm sure they would support the new arrangements if there's one. Now, as I said, we are now conducting comprehensive review on maternity leave arrangement. If Ms. Alice Mack or any other members would like us to cover certain issues within the scope of the study, we'll be happy to consider that. But I cannot promise what the findings will be like now, of course. Mr. Eddie Chu. 10 years ago, Chief Executive, you said conservation and development must be balanced. Now, for the Lantau Island, the government's development policy is not to develop the southern part of the Lantau Island. But then when Mr. Paul Chan, the Financial Secretary, officiated over a certain ceremony, he said that for Pui O, Tong Fuk, and Shui Hao, there are people carrying out illegal dumping to destroy the environment. Now, and the situation persisted even after the setting up of the Lantau Conservation Office. Now, this toilet seat cover, or toilet seat, was picked up at Pui O, where there's a wetland for buffaloes. And that's the area you said you would try to conserve. Now, for the selfish and short-sighted people who exploited the revenue loophole to dump illegally in these conservation areas of Lantau Island, are you going to condemn them? Can you make sure that they know what they're doing is wrong? They're causing destruction to Hong Kong this way. And how? When are you going to revise the town planning ordinance and the waste disposal ordinance so that the Environmental Protection Department will have the power to severely punish people engaging in illegal dumping? Chief Executive. Well, Mr. Chu must remember that in the policy address I was the first to advocate balancing conservation and development, and we have made some achievements, but doesn't mean we should be complacent now. You mentioned the Southern Lantau case. Yes, I studied that too. In terms of surveillance and law enforcement, indeed, there's room for improvement. I have required the relevant bureau and department to work even harder in stepping up enforcement. If there is need for additional manpower or resources, I will talk to the Financial Secretary to provide the resources. But then with any law, it can never be perfect. There's always a gray area. So there will always be a loophole where you see as destruction of the habitat, but perhaps that's not against law. So that's why it's necessary that we step up public education so everyone in Hong Kong will chip in to conserve our beautiful countryside and coastal areas. Well, exactly, because there's a loophole. So are you going to do anything to condemn those exploiting the loophole? Chief Executive, if there's a loophole in the law, in other words, it means what someone's doing is not against the law, so we have to look at the individual cases. Dr. Junius Ho. Mr. Eddie Chu, please take your seat. Dr. Junius Ho. Chief Executive, yesterday is a Black Tuesday. There's a turmoil in the stock market. The index plummeted by some 5%. And then yesterday there was also the Court of Final Appeal ruling. Yes, you quoted some part of it. I will study that in detail. But the effect is many people in Hong Kong have been let down. Now, so if you want to achieve a certain cause, so you can break the law and you can storm Hong Kong, and you can undermine our prosperity and stability. Is that the case? This is a major issue, and we will have to study it further. Now, anyway, you mentioned legislating for Article 23 when you assumed office. Is there a time frame for this? Can you tell this council when you plan to do so? Now, you've been in post for more than 6 months now. Yes, I know you have an onerous workload, but legislating for Article 23 is a constitutional obligation. So you need to set the tone, and then things would become easier. Now, on the 1st of July, President Xi, when he was in Hong Kong, said that we must remain committed. And I'm sure, you know, with your style, I'm sure you know exactly what President Xi expected of us. So when are you going to give us a timetable for legislating for Article 23?
CE, thank you for Mr. Ho's question. Legislating for Article 23 is a constitutional duty. I am in full grasp of that, and I understand that. But since my election campaign last year until the announcement of my first policy address, my stance with regard to Article 23 is that we have to do this. But if we were to entrench Article 23 in local laws, we need a favorable environment so that we can promote such controversial issues in Hong Kong. In the past 7 months, people say we have got off to a good start and society has become more peaceful. But we have not come to a point where we have a favorable environment. Therefore, for the time being, I do not have a specific timetable for legislating for Article 23, but I do keep that in mind all the time. As you said, for accountability officials and also for the chief executive, this is actually a sign of our commitment. I'd like to follow up, please. Yes, Mr. Ho. The CE said that there is not such an objective environment. I beg to differ because recently, actually, last July, the Leung Kok Hong case was judged, and there was a ruling on public officials receiving advantages. Mr. Michael Tin, CE has been doing something quick for what is urgent, and I agree totally for the environment of $500 million to the hospital authority, and it has enjoyed the support of all people across the political spectrum. And of course, it is better to have it than not to have it. But I first declare my 3 children are in kindergarten, and the news has it that you have to cut the epidemic chain. And so tomorrow, starting from tomorrow, there will be an early start of the Lunar New Year holidays for kindergartens and primary schools. Up to now, 11 people have died from the flu this year. 2 are children, and experts are telling us, yes, there are more adults dying than children, but it's usually children who are infecting the adults. Therefore, you have to make sure that children do not get infected, and it is where you need to break the epidemic chain. And I will give you this very concrete proposal. Starting from this year, you should get 200 medical staff to set up 2 injection teams to mandatorily give jabs to primary school and kindergarten school children in 2 months, so that from now the vaccination rate is 20%, you should raise it to 90% or even 100%. Of course, if it's mandatory, you also need the consent of parents. Yes, I know you need the consent of parents, so you also need to educate the parents, and I have done the sums for you. Mr. Tin, you will need $60 million, and administrative staff $10 million, and seeking parental consent $80 million for publicity, and vaccination 20 million. So altogether, you need to spend this sum. I have done the homework, so she just has to say yes or no. Can you promise that such a brilliant plan can be implemented ASAP? So every year from tomorrow, next year onwards, you just have to fork out $200 million in all. The winter surge is caused by influenza B, and it is affecting children more. About half an hour ago, the Department of Health announced that we will ask nurseries, kindergartens, and primary schools to start the New Year holidays early. And as Mr. Michael Tin said, we are trying to cut this flu from spreading. That is brilliant. In the last 2 days, together with the experts and also my colleagues, I have looked into the issue. But this is only a short-term measure because there will be different influenzas. And we should get prepared, not just for the next winter surge. There may be another outbreak in summer, just like last summer. But as to whether it will be influenza A or B, we don't know yet. Then can you not vaccinate all children? Well, I will promise you there will be a better plan to prevent infection. But whether or not we will adopt your plan, maybe not. Because when we implement it, your plan may not be very feasible. Therefore, we have to look into the issue ourselves to launch a more effective plan. Dr. Chang Chong-tai. Mrs. Lam, yesterday the media reported that some very high-ranking officials, 2 permanent secretaries, who were exploiting the first buyer scheme in order to save stamp duty to the tune of $5 to $6 million. I think this is a worse case than Theresa Zhang. Theresa Zhang was not a government official then, but these 2 high-ranking officials were actually involved in formulating the tough measures to cool the market. Well, we are not saying that they are necessarily contravening the misconduct in public office or any other rules. But then there is this impression given to the community that from a secretary of department to our civil service, that they are trying to gain advantage. And it makes people feel cheap. What I'd like to ask you whether it is the integrity check or the declaration of interest system. Do you admit that there are loopholes? Or is it that you still embrace your own attitude that we should be accommodating or tolerant towards these people who may be trying to gain advantage by using their official positions? CE, the SAR government and myself, when we approach principal officials or civil servants, we have very high expectations of their conduct, and we are protected by well-established policies. But then policies may have to be improved or enhanced as times change. I have an open mind towards that, whether it is councillors or the media. If they give specious information and then you carry on a hype in order to smear civil servants or officials, I think that is a problem. Whether or not you talk about the secretary of departments or the 2 civil servants, if you look at a certain cover of a magazine published today, it is about myself. It is not a small matter, but a big matter. It was said that a technology company may be using new listing rules, which is to be decided by the financial secretary. It is linked to one of my sons, and it is said that the technology company may be worth $10 million. Now, this is very specious information. I'm not going to sue for libel because it is a waste of time, and I believe I am innocent, and I will be known to be innocent. Therefore, and people will be fair in making a judgment. Dr. Chang is implying or actually saying that the 2 civil servants have breached the law in buying property. Well, I hope you will be more cautious with your words. But if you have a doubt, I welcome making inquiries by you to the Secretary for the Civil Service, and he will answer you clearly. Dr. Chang. Mrs. Lam, you should not be confusing the public. I'm asking about the integrity check or the declaration of interest system. I did not ask about yourself. Dr. Chang, please sit down. Mr. Martin Liao, President, I think there is every advantage for these very short question times. Last week, there was already a solution to a question raised last week, and you can see that the administration is very responsive to reasonable and feasible suggestions. I'd like to thank the CE and also the relevant departments. That was about a question raised by Mr. Ronick Chan. With regard to the by-election of a functional constituency to be held in March, there is a candidate who is involved in UBWs, and there is a criminal liability. It was said that after buying the property, it was the candidate himself who erected the structures, and there were many structures that were not declared to the buildings department, and in fact there was a charge entered into the deeds. But before the information, sorry, what is the point of order? President, Mr. Yip Kin Yun, I don't think it is appropriate for candidates who are involved in an election should be discussed here in the council. Is it against certain rules? Well, yes, this is election time. I hope you will exercise caution. I haven't heard the question yet. Mr. Martin Liao, please continue. The S4J did not receive notice, but then she already apologized, and then she already carried out follow-up work. So it is very different. I'd like to ask the CE whether the government will act in an impartial manner and seriously take this candidate to task and ask him to shoulder responsibility for the UBWs. CE, the answer is very simple. Whenever there are high-ranking officials or personalities who are famous, who are involved, we will always be impartial and treat everybody equally. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. Thank you, President. Chief Executive, today, in view of the influenza outbreak, the government has announced that there would be an early holiday break for kindergartens and primary schools so that children will have a less chance of being affected. But elderly people, are you helping them? It seems you are not really helping the elderly in this epidemic outbreak. But then the DAB has always said that you should enhance the amount for the elderly health voucher scheme, and you should not limit the validity period to 2 years. I understand that the government is sitting on very handsome reserves. I'd like to ask the SARG whether you can inject money into the voucher scheme and allow elderly people to enjoy $10,000 worth of vouchers with no time limit. Thank you for the question, Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. In terms of preventing an influenza outbreak, we have done comprehensive work with the elderly people. With regard to the vaccination rate, for example, elderly people have a higher vaccination rate. This time around, we have an influenza B outbreak. Experts are telling us that we should worry more about children. That is why we have taken the action. It doesn't mean that we don't care about the health of elderly people. As for the elderly health voucher scheme, whether we can enhance the amount, well, it is, of course, about resource allocation. It will be up to the financial secretary to take a comprehensive look to see what he can do with the budget. But recently, I have heard more about the use or abuse of such vouchers, and society has raised some concern. I understand the Director of Health will first look into the mechanism of the vouchers to see whether it can achieve its original purpose, and that is to encourage elderly people to do more prevention, say, for example, by undergoing body checks, so that it will minimize the chance for bigger diseases or even hospitalization. Mr. C, I understand that there is a time limit for using the vouchers. It is 2 years, and the elderly people may want to spend them within the time limit, and that is why some of them buy fish more with it. But without the time limit, they will not react in such a way. Will you do away with the time limit? We can consider that. But why is there a validity period? It is, as I said, when we launched the vouchers in the past, we wanted to give more money to the elderly people so that they can go to see private doctors, so that they can go undergo physical examination, and they don't have to save up money, but can make use of the money in an effective way. But as I said, the entire measure of this elderly health voucher scheme should be looked into. Dr. K.K. Kwok. President, we thought that the CE would condone a principal official who is involved in UBW, and we think that that is already very regrettable. But then we can see that this is worse than the August 31st restrictive decision made by the NPCSC. But now you rely on a middle-ranking civil servant to disqualify a candidate by making use of political censorship, and you are purging the entire generation, and you are also making use of the excuse that you were not in Hong Kong. And of course, that is very despicable. But anyway, I don't want to go into that. I'm going into a livelihood issue. You are forking out $500 million for Hong Kong people, averaging out to $78 per person. But today, beds are put in the corridors, in the toilets of hospitals. There are no flu jabs or injections. But it has not happened only today. There is not enough resources for medical care. The last time this was mentioned, it was in 2009, made by Mr. Donald Tsang. In the pediatric wards of Tuen Mun Hospital, the utilization rate is 142%. And John Tsang said that there should be the building of more hospitals. Your opponent that you hated, it was 2 years ago. But now everybody is saying that we do not have enough hospitals. The worst in NT West. What are you going to do? Do you still want elderly people to be sleeping on a bed in toilets of hospitals 10 years ago, later? How can you promise us that there will be enough resources so that Hong Kong people, elderly people, will not be in such a plight? $70 is really a big sum indeed. Please. Mr. KK Kwok, you have exceeded the 1.5 minutes for asking your questions.
Chief Executive, now for the financial shortfall for the Hospital Authority, I hope members remember in 2013 there was the 011 plan, and I was the only Chief Executive candidate at the time that I mentioned in my manifesto that we should stop this 011 plan. And the Financial Secretary has adopted my new fiscal philosophy, and in the coming year we are going to make up for the shortfall arising from 011. In fact, we may even give additional resources in view of a growing population and the additional healthcare demands as a result of a growing population. That's what this term of government is going to do. I know every word you utter has a political motive, but please get to grips with the fact. Now, after I announced the $500 million, I know on the whole that's a positive response, but you have adopted it as a political show. No, I ask you, within your term, what you are going to do to provide more hospital beds. Last time your opponent was John Tsang, but would you do something? Please take your seat. We're doing a lot in healthcare services with limited time. Can I please refer Dr. KK Kwok to my policy address and the policy agenda for the series of initiatives? The Chief Executive's question time ends here. After the Chief Executive has left the chamber, this Council will hold this regular meeting immediately. The Chief Executive will now leave the chamber. Members will please stand up. Dr. KK Kwok. Members, please remain quiet. Dr. KK Kwok. I now adjourn the Council. We now proceed to the regular Council meeting.